such an honor and a privilege to be invited to talk to the Union here tonight. A society that has kind of heard speak some of my greatest heroes. People like the Dalai Lama, Malcolm X, Albert Einstein, and Peter Andre. Indeed, upon receiving the very humbling invitation from your president to address this very handsome crowd I see before me, it was the prestige of his union and its past speakers that quickly replaced my sense of joy and pride with one of slight worry and anxiety. What the hell would I talk about? I wondered. I haven't tried to foster a universal compassion across the globe, or fought oppression in America, or even explored the mysteries of the universe, be them hidden in some theory of quantum mechanics or just a particularly mysterious girl. All I've done is act in a TV show and pretend to be mean for money, essentially. Worst comes to worst, I thought to myself I could at least bring along my trusty crossbow and kind of perhaps sexually threaten some unsuspecting students with impalement. I thought, well, we discussed that, and that didn't fly with the board. But from your invitation, it returned my thoughts to a kind of an all too similar event I participated in a few weeks previous, during which 20 minutes into a rather long, hour-long Q&A session, both Q's and A's respectively dried up very quickly. So with 40 minutes left of the event and apparently all value sucked from it like a tropical mini Capri Sun, my blood froze as I gazed out at the sea of kind of awkwardly shifting faces. The silence was finally broken by a strained question about what I'd consumed for breakfast that morning. It was at that point I realized that after a mere 21 years of a relatively uneventful life, one simply cannot expect to talk about oneself for an hour, especially without either sliding into kind of irrelevant or the babbling. I literally just don't have enough to talk about for an hour. So in a bid to avoid the inevitable kind of drought of questions tonight, before we come to the forthcoming Q&A, I decided I would kind of try and waste as much time as possible talking about something that kind of hopefully won't preemptively answer any questions, because every answer is golden in terms of time, but kind of will perhaps hopefully kind of be interesting, and it'll be relevant to my life in kind of Game of Thrones. So basically, since the kind of show has aired, and apologies for the kind of length and boring nature of this. I did it all last night, and it's very rambling, and please feel free to switch off at any point during it. But I'm just kind of try and read it in an interesting way, because it's not interesting. Since the show has aired, I feel I've been given an insider look into an ever-pervasive and yet often mysterious aspect of society, namely our culture of celebrity. Strangers on the street now call me Jack, and my public image is democratized by fans and institutions alike on the internet. I'm also given opportunities like this one tonight, which I see as truly once in a lifetime. So feeling somewhat within, but also very much abstracted from modern celebrity culture, if you want to call it that, that kind of feeling has provoked a lot of reflection within me about the thing, about my position within the thing. So I kind of wanted to take this opportunity to perhaps talk about those reflections. But I do appreciate the irony of talking about kind of celebrity in this context. But I hope the irony is taken with a pinch of salt. But yeah, I mean, I feel like some of these reflections perhaps are somewhat unique in the sense that I'm in a unique position, straddling the kind of cigarettes and books of a student simultaneously with the with the cocaine and prostitutes of a celebrity. But ever since my mother sent me to Saturday morning drama classes when I was 7, I wanted to become a famous actor. I loved the idea of captivating an audience and moving them truly through performance, but more importantly being recognized and heavily lauded for that talent. Early on, I just performed in some small plays and short films and the like, most notably giving my Joseph in a school nativity at age 8. Critics hailed my Joseph as being raw and entrancing and having a profound insight into the character that will never be matched by anyone ever again. It was thrilling. Indeed, I drew a great deal upon my Joseph when I played Little Boy in Batman Begins in 2005. Little Boy had the same passion and drive I had seen in Joseph. the same resilience, but most importantly, the same love for his pregnant wife, Mary. However, despite only being a minute role, my appearance in Batman Begins presented me with my first encounter with celebrity. After the film came out, I was always and forever then the kid from Batman amongst my peers, my now defining feature being brought up as an icebreaker or vaguely memorable kind of tidbit at certain social occasions. The labeling didn't bother me, but I didn't necessarily enjoy it. However, little did I know that a far more concentrated form of that slight societal abstraction was going to be placed in my lap 5 years later when I would, as a bright-eyed and bushy-tailed 17-year-old, step into an audition for some HBO show called Game of Thrones. Chapter 2. Now, if I'm being honest, upon hearing the joyous news that I received the role of Joffrey, I really did not expect all of the subsidiary things that come with being an... Are there people up there as well? with being an actor on a successful television program. I had no predictions or expectations of all the attention, invitation to events, and of course, all the cocaine and prostitutes that awaited me around every corner. I was literally just excited to act in a cool show. Perhaps that was naivety, or perhaps that was, perhaps like everyone else involved in the show, I just simply didn't anticipate the success of it. In any case, whatever the reason was, what it led to was a sharp shock when I realized that I had, unbeknownst to me, signed an invisible contract which required me to enter into a strange new echelon of society. People suddenly wanted to take pictures of me on the street, and journalists were interested in what kind of socks I preferred. And, you know, among certain groups of my peers, my jokes seemed to become a lot funnier, which perhaps was all the comedy books I was reading at the time, or perhaps it was sycophancy, I don't know. It was an atmosphere from which I instantly wanted to retreat. I detested the superficial elevation and commodification of it all, juxtaposed with the grotesque self-involvement it would sometimes draw out in me. Being a faceless member of a mob, I soon realized is far more comforting than teetering on a brittle pedestal 1 inch off the ground. The exclusion and subtle differentiation that comes with a rather diluted form of celebrity that I had embarrasses me. But what struck me as most odd, however, about the whole thing was how odd I indeed found it all. Celebrity is seen by a huge amount of people, and certainly by myself for a while, as the pinnacle of society, of success. It is revered almost religiously, both the institution and its quickly growing member base. Indeed, these days, the apotheosis of celebrity is not just confined to the worship of movie idols, pop stars, sports heroes, or even reality TV stars. We have bloody celebrity chefs, authors, comedians, politicians, intellectual scientists, business people, cheesemongers or something, milliners maybe, hat makers for those if you didn't get that, who constantly stick out their faces at us on advertisements and talk shows, magazine covers, but this reverence and invasion is often welcomed and indeed fostered by a great percentage of the public. I started to wonder why that was and whether there was any harm in that reverence. They're just people after all. So whilst one could trace the origins back of kind of celebrity, or whatever you want to call it, back to the Romantic period, and people like Samuel Johnson, or even before Beckett, it was truly in the 20th century's proliferation of photography, radio, television, and finally mass media that a kind of a fecund ground could be laid for, in particular, sports stars, movie stars, and singers to be massified as recognizable, influential public figures. This kind of fostered a culture of a culture dominated by what Baudrillard called simulacra, which are like, images that contain no reference to the real world. For upon being able to, for the first time, see and also hear the well-known figures of the time, people like Charlie Chaplin and Gloria Swanson, the public began to kind of, perhaps unconsciously, reduce them down to their image alone, leading to a perhaps irreparable commodification of these protogenic celebrities. However, this, as Amy Henderson points out, this commodification was clearly less a process of this increasing breadth and influence of media, but rather of the West's transition from a producing society to a consuming one. This is so boring. America's capitalism bore out a commodity-based society in which the actions of the individual could be equated with acts of consumption. Tabloids, talk shows, and subsequently reality television all became obsessed with the commodification of the celebrity image, making it consumable and then ultimately disposable. What's then ironic is that you see celebrities endorsing things like, like musical tampons and appearing in advertisements for lavender-scented teeth whitener or something, wielding goods whose sell-by dates are, ironically probably outlast theirs. Whilst this form of cannibalistic consumerism doesn't appear inherently damaging to the consumers themselves, the effect it has on the fodder can sometimes be profound. I myself shy away from interviews in the public eye sometimes for this very reason. Having one's image and effectively life democratized dehumanizes and sometimes objectifies it into an entertainment product. What sort of valuation of the ego would one have once you've let it be preyed upon in the public eye for years and years? Perhaps it becomes truly just skin and bones. Jamie Tehrani from the University of Durham has an alternative and rather crazy theory of where our fascination of celebrity culture comes from, believing the answer to lie in evolutionary psychology, which it does sound a bit crazy, but run with it. It has a bit of value in it. His theory centers around the anthropological notion of prestige, defined in terms of a high social status, like admiration or respect, that is bestowed upon an individual who possesses a certain adaptive skill, like a superior hunting technique, etc. The prestige is bestowed upon the individual so that the community can then learn the skill from them through imitation, by being put into the public eye so they can learn the skill. However, in imitating the prestigious individual, one can also mistakenly imitate some of the non-adaptive skills the person may have. The example Tehrani uses is that men might observe a successful hunter perform some kind of incantation or whatever at the time as he retouches his arrowheads in a skilled way, and the men who observe this adopt both the ritual as well as his arrow retouching technique when they prepare their tools. So basically, Tehrani believes in our society, because of their fame, celebrities possess prestige, and as a result we have this evolutionary and psychological instinct to imitate them. This tendency, he concludes, explains our interest in what sports stars and singers wear, what car they drive, and all that. Celebrities have become our moral and social role models in some ways, simply due to an evolutionary quirk. However, what if this instinct to imitate leads us to adopt, let's say, slightly more immoral values of our current of our current modern prestigious individuals? Are we going to find ourselves in a position where we start to imitate the town drunk, perhaps simply because he possesses prestige, his original success having faded away long ago? For it is under Tehrani's theory that something rather frightening takes place, namely a self-fulfilling fame that's kind of come up only in the past decade or so, that does not need to base itself in adaptive skill or any skill, really, for that matter, because all it needs is the fuel of more celebrity and thus more prestige and thus more celebrity, and so on ad infinitum. So I think that's a good theory of where it comes from. But I think that the most compelling cause of our contemporary celebrity culture, our fascination with our contemporary celebrity culture, lies with Max Weber, who he too bases his theory in one of role models and imitation, but replacing the position taken by Tehrani's notion of prestige with his notion of charisma. So Weber believed that for any form of authority, the attribution of legitimacy is fundamental and necessary, making it what he calls a legitimate domination, which sounds pretty sexy. That must presuppose some degree of willing acceptance. Furthermore, he regarded the authority of the prophets and magicians, diviners, as different from others, since their authority depends on a certain devotion to the exceptional character of the individual, a special kind of authority, which he termed charisma. The term charisma will be applied to a certain quality, and this is a quote. No, I won't say that. Basically, people with charisma exist outside society, and that's important to it. So moreover, he remarks that the truest form of charisma is one which receives these powers as a gift by virtue of a natural endowment. So it's very easy to see how our modern celebrities are perfect manifestations of this Weberian charismatic authority. They may not possess the heroic qualities of prophet, but as highly visible role models, they have become the object of imitation. Their publicized personality and individual qualities work as a form of quasi charisma, as a few academics put it, that gains people's attention while setting them apart on a different echelon. So like classical charismatic figures, celebrities are individuals who provide people with a focus for identification, essentially. But unlike the classical charismatics, the celebrity lacks the mysterious transcendent leadership qualities of a hero prophet, but they're role models. So what celebrities also so clearly possess is that kind of willing domination that Weber describes. The other forms of authority that people encounter in every day, like the police or politicians, lecturers or the like, they're challenged by the public, as often they perhaps sometimes feel oppressive. Conversely, the authority celebrities have over us is accepted and in fact sometimes welcomed because it's not seen as being self-serving or malevolent. This is why Weber also describes the adoption or the importance of the adoption of charisma by other authorities. Politicians, for instance, sometimes almost seem to require either celebrity endorsement or some kind of celebrity status themselves to feel legitimated in the eyes of the public. It's what Weber calls gentle charisma, when the political authority combines with the charismatic authority. You can see it everywhere with the Obama, getting Will.i.am and stuff to sing about him. It's ridiculous. I voted for him. The danger hidden within Weber's charismatic celebrity is the same one within Tehrani's prestigious individual. Having a predisposition to imitate any one individual must always have its negative impact, especially when the role model does not feel a duty of responsibility to instantiate, shall we say, suitable values to adopt. I'll skip that bit. So there's also a thing, this bleeds into this kind of the fascination that comes with this charisma, which is like a celebrity worship syndrome. This is actually a real thing that people in the University of Leicester found like 36% of a sample of 600 adults were afflicted to some degree by this celebrity worship syndrome. And the most extreme sufferers believed that the object of their ardor knew them and declared themselves ready to die for their hero. But you know, it's not just a kind of a weird societal quirk. I think it's indicative of a kind of a complete dissolution of the self in favor of another, which can be seen as almost like a direct translation from perhaps a religious hysteria. I see it as, whether it's a mob mentality or desire to be controlled by something higher than you. These cases are indicative of how charisma can replace the ego. Dostoevsky says in The Brothers, how do you even pronounce that? I've never known. Karamazov. He says, so long as man remains free, he strives for nothing so incessantly and painfully as to find someone to worship. Conversely, to try and find a, kind of a positive boon for celebritization, a guy called Chris Rojek, professor of sociology at City University, has defended the benefits of this form of communal imitation. He says celebrities are informal life coaches. By watching them, people learn how to groom, learn how to wear their hair, learn what to say, learn what opinions are sexy, learn what's right on and not right on. He's a pretty cool dude. They're simulating all sorts of life skills. So, and he says that this is kind of a social adhesive, which is positive. So that's a kind of a, I don't believe that, but I just put that in as a balanced argument. But up until now, I've discussed kind of three theories: economic, psychological, and sociological, that attempt to explain our reverence of celebrities. But now I'll talk very briefly about the desire itself to become a celebrity. Because obviously there's the kind of immediate desire for wealth or admiration, adoration. But is there more than that? And if so, what's the catch? What are the disadvantages? So there's one way to look at this desire to be a celebrity in the form of the perspective of our personality centric culture, one that has strayed inward away from the external character-based one of the 19th and early 20th century. So personality has become a means to distinguish ourselves from the masses, and as a result, celebrity has become the new measure of success. I came across a great article by Jörg Semmel, who discusses this phenomenon in his The Metropolis and the Mental Life, in which he kind of sheds light on this very modern angst of being unknown that I think affects a lot of people and anonymous. So perhaps in a hypertrophic Berkeleyism, to be is to be perceived, the validation of our existence has become relative to how anonymous, or rather unanonymous, we are. Truly, it is the clawing for this some kind of individual self and self-orientation amidst the clamor and growing competition of the 21st century that attracts people to becoming celebrities. The golden ticket, immortality, is on sale. Is it not shouted from the rooftops of a New York conservatory, "Fame, I want to live forever"? So I did that. Secondly, another point on the reasons of wanting to become a celebrity. What could be more alluring about being a celebrity than having a captive audience, kind of willing to trust what you trust and care about what you care about? In many ways, you could see it in terms of kind of a manifestation of a master-slave dialectic with immense mobilization and communicative power. So what are the dangers then involved in being a celebrity? On the one hand, there's in some ways the true loss of the self by virtue of being democratized, oversaturated, overloved perhaps. Without an internally directed compass, an ego can drown in its own fascination, rendering the bearer unable to posit or hang anything actual onto themselves. This again is essentially the argument from commodification, which prescribes a kind of a ravenous, ecstatic feast upon a soul until it becomes defined purely in terms of its external ability to in fact be consumed. For instance, those who It's another weird kind of psychological study. Another, those who actually achieve fame are supposedly vulnerable to conditions like acquired situational narcissism, which says this affliction can cause a celebrity to get so used to everyone looking at him or them that he stops looking back at his perceivers. This may lead to kind of grandiose fantasies and self-aggrandizement, rage and loss of empathy, and all those bad things that we see every day kind of in celebrity meltdowns, you know, if that's not a kind of a crude way to put it. This bleeds into another point, again, previously alluded to, namely one of exclusion. Celebrities become excluded from everyday life, kind of in exile, in an echelon that's deemed better anyway. Life of a celebrity, all the fame and glamour. However, no matter how much we can lust after this exile, wanting to be celebrity is a manifestation of a dehumanization, essentially. One becomes easier to fictionalize when removed from any self-likeness of the perceiver, and thus easier to judge and also consume. And lastly, of course, there's the issue of privacy that comes up a lot. But you know, we've seen from my points about Tehrani and Weber why we become fascinated with the banal mundanity of celebrity life. You know, what kind of bananas they like and stuff. They are the prescribed role models of our time, representing some form of ideal in apparently every aspect of life, be it in their professional success, cheese preference, or even drug preference. Perhaps the desire to simultaneously position celebrities on both planes, the ordinary and the abstracted, is a bid to retrieve some of the immortality we have given them. By empathizing with them and humanizing them to an extent, we, for a brief moment, share in the glory of celebrity life, or perhaps at least remind ourselves that if they can do it, I can do it. In conclusion, thankfully, it appears celebrities have become vessels of either, as I say, an economic, evolutionary, or sociological instinct to consume and imitate certain extraordinary members of society. We've seen how this reverence can have profound effects on both parties, oftentimes more negative than positive. I believe that communal admiration of individuals is healthy for society. It facilitates, in one way, a debate about universal standards, morals, but also publicly espouses the virtue of certain practices that are kind of like inherently good in some kind of ideas of what the good is. However, this kind of celebrization is only a positive one if the individual represents values that should be imitated by, say, a reasonable moral person. We need to be choosier with our celebrities, or else we may find ourselves again in that situation where we just find ourselves acting out the role of the town drunk constantly. And we also need to temper the concentration with which we love to celebritize, primarily for the sake of the celebrity themselves and their self-evaluation, but also for ourselves. Just as the object of our attention can become rendered hollow and externally directed with too much worship, so too, I feel, can the worshippers sacrifice their own individual self or autonomy in favor of giving it up to a higher power. We need to fight against our human instinct to deify our role models, but also fight against the instinct to subjugate our own individuality in the process. Stargazing is one of the most profoundly human things one can do, but perhaps we must more frequently tear ourselves away from the mystery and beauty of the starry heavens above, and rather inspect, admire, and foster the moral law within. That's it. Thank you.